Greetings, this is Rick Ward from Working Class Wealth Creations, where we help first-generation wealth creators. I'm an employee who loves my job, but to allow me to create the lifestyle and the goals that I want to achieve in my life, I had to do something beyond wages. I had to become an investor. On that journey to become an investor, making it my hobby, along the way I developed a multi-million-dollar property and stock portfolio. In this series of videos, My Road to Wealth outlines deal by deal all the lessons that I learned, all the struggles I had, all the successes. You can follow me along and see how I created wealth well beyond my imagination or expectations that my family or I had even on myself. I believe this is possible for anyone who really wants to commit themselves to the effort. So as we go along through these 25 property deals, I'll outline some of the places where there was some luck. There was good luck going for me. There was a few things that went against me. But it was much to deal with my mindset, how great the successes were, and how devastating some of the losses were. I believe mindset played a huge factor in both sides. As you follow along these deals, I'll finish every deal with the lessons learned from that deal, the good and the bad, and something that's going to better prepare you along your journey for your first generation wealth. So let's have a look at deal number 2 right now. Now, deal number 2 did become my primary residence, and it's where I live today, and I hope to live there for all of my days. It's my dream home in a beautiful location. But when I purchased this property, it wasn't my primary residence. And so the bank looked upon it much as an investment loans, and it has been the cornerstone for my investment activities. As I built equity in this property, I was able to leverage that to buy investment properties. Much like those of you who have a home and you have equity in your home, you can use that. I'll show you a lot of strategies around that. So even though this is my primary residence, it's played a huge part in my investment journey. So for starters, following my first video, which is my primary residence and the strategies I used for that, I moved into my wife's home. We sold that home and did some upgrades and stuff with the profits from my house. It was a beautiful house on a beautiful block, but it just wasn't mine, and we wanted a bit more space around us. It was in town. So we found a rural block just on the outskirts of town. Initially, we looked for land and house packages out in the country, but back then it was around $300,000 to buy 5 acres with a house on it. And my wife and I made $35,000 each. And so it was beyond our understanding what we could afford then. With the skills I've amassed over the last few years, I know I could cut different deals and it's not out of our reach. But with our understanding at the time, both of us coming from that working class background, we just didn't understand. We only knew traditional bank ways. And the traditional way of banking and buying houses in the day, we just couldn't afford that. When we looked at the houses were never exactly like we wanted. We would have had to do upgrades and change them. So again, the cost blowing out there and trying to make somebody else's house as yours just wasn't going to happen. So we looked at vacant blocks of land. Now, vacant blocks of land come in a bit cheaper. They were running around 5 acres was about $150,000. We did find a 2-acre block on a golf course, which is much cheaper, much affordable. We were afraid to buy that one without selling our own house first. Having 2 mortgages is quite a scary thought to us. So we held off, but we held off too long on that block sold. I was quite devastated. I used to go out to that block just about every night and walk around it and visualize my dream home. But we didn't understand what sort of deals you could structure, and we couldn't figure out how we could have both. But then we kept looking, and we come across a 5-acre spot, much better location, and they were asking $150,000 for that, and that was probably at our top end. We didn't really have much of a mortgage on my wife's house, so it was affordable. We could have bought that as well as maintaining our mortgage, and we would sell the house as soon as we could. And we didn't want to miss out on this opportunity, so we decided to go ahead and put an offer on it. Now, I was asking $150,000. The market was quite low. This particular estate was a private estate that a farmer had subdivided his farm up. And it had a lot of wetlands in the back, and so to the locals it was known as swampland, and people didn't want to be there. It had a bad rep. When I told my wife to come out and look, and she goes, "Oh no, that's swampland. I'm not going to look at that." And I came out and I looked around. I saw the block and I just loved it. And had big, substantial trees. And so I got a post hole digger and I dug down and I found the water levels about 3.5 meters or 10 feet. And this is winter time, so I was like, "This ain't swampland." So I got my wife to come out and have a look, and she fell in love with the place too. As soon as she saw it, it was fantastic. But my wife's very good at negotiations, and she wanted to pay less than full price. I was quite happy to pay the $150. There was another block in the estate for the same price, $150,000. It's from the original developer, the farmer, and this block that we liked was actually a resale. It was the first block ever sold in the estate. In my opinion, it's one of the best. Just because of the large trees and kind of open parkland. It was beautiful. So we started playing the two off against each other, trying to get the price down. And I researched both people and had a chat with the owners and trying to figure out their motivations for selling. The farmer had used all of his money to make this development, and he sold a few blocks first, including this other one I was trying to buy. But the rest just weren't bad. It was the bottom of the property market, and it just wouldn't sell. So he had a lot of financial strain on him, and the seller that had bought mine was in the same situation. He was an investor, and he had other properties in other areas, and he had to sell something to keep himself going. So he was quite motivated to sell. But in the end, we really did want to see as far as we could go on our preferred block, and if we just couldn't get anywhere, then we would try with the second one. And so we tried many different tactics, early settlements, told them how keen we were to buy, but we just couldn't afford getting it, that we were going to have to borrow some of the money from parents or something to get by. We were really keen, but we just couldn't buy it at the $150, and we ended up getting it for $134, which I just thought was a steal at the time. And shortly after that, the estate was no longer a private estate. They took the sign down, and it just became 5-acre blocks of rural land. And when they did that, all the blocks, people started looking, because they didn't have the stigma of this particular area that the locals thought of. It was just 5 acres of rural land. And so heaps of people come out looking, and all the blocks started selling like hotcakes, and they sold because people had these prejudice against it, which weren't founded on anything real. We purchased a 5-acre block. We still had the house in town, which was really good. We borrowed some money, as well as buying the land, to borrow some money to build a large shed, a barn, American-style barn, which I would build into a living quarters, which we would live on the block while we were building the big house, the new house. And so it was good that a lot of the work we did up front, I was able to still go home to the house in town and get in our spa and relax. And it was a nice way of living. And we finished the barn out on the rural property. And shortly after that, our house did sell in town. And so we moved out into our barn full time while we started work on our dream home. As I stated in one of my earlier videos, we really had no idea what it was going to cost to build our dream home, and so we could borrow $100,000 against the block of land and a line of credit, and so full steam ahead. I started owner building, and we got the shell of the house completed, and it looked great on the outside, but on the inside we didn't even have any walls or wiring or plumbing or anything, and that was our $100,000 spent. So I realized that I had to become an investor. I had to find some other way. Career-wise, at the time, I was making pretty good money, and I wasn't going to be able to get much of an increase on that. So I had to find other avenues of income. Again, I've kind of used up the equity in our block. We don't have much money there. We did have the shell of the house, which actually added a significant value to the block. But what the banks wouldn't do is, what I had to do is I had to make a list and I had to put a business plan together to the bank, saying this is the property that we have now. It's going to cost me X amount of dollars, and at the end of that X amount of dollars, it's going to be worth this much. And then I had real estate agent letters and things like that justifying the square footage. Yes, once I do this, and I had some quotes for materials and things of building companies of what it would cost to fix it, which that's not normal. That's not a normal way things are going. You have a property that's finished, And there were some banks I went to and they said, well, no, they wouldn't do that because, so what I started to learn then is different banks have different risk profiles and they have different internal rules. And there's times that banks want market share, and so they work with people to take on a bit more risk. And that rotates. I started with my first bank, and they were happy to loan me money for my house, but they weren't going to loan me money for an investment. And then other banks, when I showed them my idea of what I wanted, they said no. But then I figured it was too hard for me to be going around and finding out who this banking industry, it's a whole world of its own. So I reached out to a mortgage broker that my brother-in-law recommended. And mortgage brokers are free. They charge the banks. They don't charge you. And it's their life. They live and breathe the banking system, and they know which banks are in which cycle, which ones will work with you, and what banks will do what and which ones won't. So that was extremely valuable to use a mortgage broker to have that expertise instead of me going around trying to figure it out by poking in the dark and just putting submissions to people. So we found a bank that would work with us under that scheme that, all right, I want to buy this investment property, but the bank would lend me the deposit on an investment property, conditions that I would complete the house. And I'd have X amount of equity. It was equity that wasn't even there, but I kind of created it with a piece of paper. Then we took that to go off to buy our first investment property. We lived in the shed, so there was a dwelling there. So that definitely added value to the property as well. So that was our start with investing. And so that was deal number 2. And these are the lessons I learned in that deal. Procrastination often leads to the loss of opportunity. This is our biggest disadvantage of being first-time investors and having a working class mindset. We often take too much time to actually step in and take action. I've lost some really good deals over the time in the early days, so taking action is crucial. Don't be swayed by local stigma. Like in our case with this deal, they said it was wetlands because it's Bunyip Estate type thing, had a name to it, a stigma. But when they looked at it as just rural land in this district, then it sold straight away. The investors come in and had a look. I've seen other areas, especially ones that for urban renewal, they're really bad neighborhoods, but the government steps in and redevelops them, and the property values go through the roof. But you don't want to invest in that if you're local because you know the name. But the professional investors have no problem stepping in. They look at the numbers and locations. So don't be swayed by any local stigmas. Research the vendor's motivations. If possible, see if you can talk to the vendors directly instead of going to the real estate agents to find out how motivated they really are to do this. And negotiate hard with alternative vendors. If you can find 2 similar houses, start with the one that you really want, but then have gaps, have that offer time limited. It ends on Friday at 4 o'clock, and then give them a week to think about it. And either you can go and make an offer on the other alternative vendor, or just let them sit for a week and then come back again. So it just puts a bit more pressure on the vendor to make a deal with you. Get quotes before making an offer. If this requires renovation or you plan on building, get some quotes beforehand so you have an idea of what it's going to cost you. It's no good buying a property then it's an unlivable state, or you just can't get it up to speed. You don't get the money first, and you can adjust your offer so you got all your costs going in. We'll talk about how to make an offer and do another session on making offers. Make offers subject to acceptable finance. You always make it subject to finance, because if you put up a deposit, it's possible that if you can't get finance, you could lose your deposit. So you always make a condition to acceptable finance. Now, acceptable finance means it's finance that you have terms, because it's possible that you could be that someone will lend you the money, including the vendor, but at rates that don't make the deal any good anymore. So you have the right to refusal on that. Again, I'll do a video on making offers and all the conditions and things you need to do around that. Add value as soon as possible. The idea is to take risk out, because in some jurisdictions, with the fees and everything, you could be behind the ball already 5% in the hole. So to get some equity in your property, you want to add value as soon as possible, whether that's a carport, a reno, just something that will add value. So it's the worst case scenario that you could turn around and sell this straight away to at least get out of the deal without a loss. Present the bank, or if you're using a broker, present the broker with a business plan, and this helps you think out the whole deal to make sure it's profitable. This is what you want to do, this is what you're going to spend, this is what your profit's going to be. It makes you look professional to the bank, and gives your broker a really good idea what you're trying to achieve, so they can add their finesse to it and structure it so in a way that will achieve what you want to achieve, and in a way that the bank likes. So it makes it easier for the bank to approve your loan. So what did this deal look like? So the asking price was $150,000, and the date of purchase was 1998. Ended up purchasing the property for $134,000. There was $6,700 in fees, construction and infrastructure of the house, sheds, pool area, all the outbuildings come to a total of $270,000. So the total investment was $560,700. The current value in 2019 is about $1,450,000, which gives us an unrealized profit of $889,300, and that's a really good return. And I'll have another video on the difference between unrealized profit and realized profit, and I'll talk a bit more of that as we go along. Well, I hope you found that interesting, and if you did, give me a thumbs up. And so if this is the kind of content you're interested in, I would encourage you to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you'll be notified as soon as I release any new content. And you can follow me on my Facebook page, on Instagram, LinkedIn, or Twitter, or my website, workingclasswealthcreations.com. If you have any specific questions about real estate investing, you can contact me on my email, workingclasswealthcreations@gmail.com. So until next time, this is Rick Ward, helping you create, manage, and retain your first generation wealth.